David Vuillemin never won an AMA Supercross championship, not one. And if you judge a rider purely by title count, he disappears from the conversation entirely, a footnote in an era defined by names that echo louder. But here's the problem with that lens. It erases context. It flattens history, and it ignores the single most important truth about David Vuillemin's career. He raced in the most brutally dominant Supercross era in the history of the sport, against riders who didn't just win titles, they defined them. So the real question is how he became one of the most respected and feared riders of his generation without ever holding the #1 plate. If you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. Hit subscribe and stay in the gate with us for the next breakdown. Back to the video. The easy answer is to call him inconsistent. That's the label that followed him from Europe to the States. Fast on his night, dangerous when he wasn't, explosive but unreliable. Those are the words that show up when you dig into old race reports and forum threads. And yeah, there's truth there. Vuillemin's riding style was aggressive to the point of reckless, built on instinct and commitment rather than calculated pace management. He threw himself into rhythms and whoop sections like a rider with nothing to lose, because mentally, that's exactly how he approached racing. High risk, high variance. When it worked, he was untouchable. When it didn't, he was on the ground. But framing that as a weakness misses the point entirely, because in Supercross, especially in the early 2000s, that aggression was the only way to stay close to the riders at the front. Let's talk about who he was racing against. From 1999 to 2006, the AMA Supercross series wasn't just competitive, it was historically loaded. Ricky Carmichael, the GOAT, dominated the premier class with a level of precision and relentlessness the sport had never seen, winning 5 Supercross championships in 2001, 2002, 2003, 2005, and 2006. James Stewart entered the premier class in 2005 and immediately became the only rider who could match Carmichael's raw speed, revolutionizing what was physically possible on a dirt bike. Chad Reed arrived from Australia in 2002, won the 125 East Championship in his rookie year, moved up to the 250 class in 2003, and proved he belonged in that conversation, winning the 2004 championship when Carmichael was sidelined with injury, then battling for titles every year after. Kevin Windham, already a veteran by the early 2000s, was still winning races and podiuming, riding with a smoothness and flow that made him nearly impossible to beat on certain tracks. And that's just the top tier. Jeremy McGrath was still racing through 2002, Ezra Lusk, Stefan Roncada, Nick Wey, Mike LaRocco, Tim Ferry. This was not a field with 1 or 2 dominant riders and a bunch of also-rans. This was almost the deepest talent pool Supercross had ever seen, and the riders at the front weren't just fast, they were generational. Being close to a title in that era didn't mean you were almost good enough, it meant you were exceptional. David Vuillemin arrived in the AMA full-time in 2000 after winning the 1999 World Supercross Championship, a short 3-round series where he beat Sebastian Tortelli. He was French, which already made him an outsider in American Supercross, and his style didn't translate cleanly to stadium racing. Supercross rewards consistency, precision, and the ability to execute the same lines lap after lap without mistakes. Outdoor motocross, especially in Europe, rewards adaptability and raw aggression. You win by being faster through the rough sections, not by hitting marks. Vuillemin raced like an outdoor guy in a Supercross series, and that disconnect cost him. He crashed when he shouldn't have. He pushed too hard in practice and ended up injured. He took risks in heat races that left him buried in the main. But here's what the stat sheet doesn't show. When he was on, he beat everyone, including Ricky Carmichael, including Jeremy McGrath. Vuillemin won 7 AMA Supercross races across his career. 4 wins came in his rookie season in 2000, San Diego, Phoenix, Minneapolis, and New Orleans, where he finished second in the championship behind Jeremy McGrath. That year, he did something no one had done before. He caught McGrath from behind at Phoenix and passed him for the win. McGrath was literally speechless on the podium. 3 more wins came in 2002, Anaheim 1, San Diego, and Indianapolis, where he led Carmichael for half the season before a practice crash before Daytona broke his shoulder blade, forcing him to miss the race and hand the championship to Carmichael. That Indianapolis win was his last Supercross main event victory, and it came after he stalked behind the Pastrana-Carmichael battle, then executed a last-lap pass on Carmichael after Pastrana had crashed out. Those 7 wins came against the greatest collection of Supercross talent ever assembled on the same gate. He beat Carmichael head-to-head, he beat McGrath, he beat riders who would go on to win multiple championships. And he didn't do it by accident or because the top guys crashed, he did it because on those nights, he was the best rider on the track. That's elite-level variance, and in an era where 1 or 2 bad nights could bury you in the championship. Variance was the difference between titles and respect. The reason Vuillemin never won a championship comes down to 2 things: his riding style and the structure of Supercross itself. His aggression gave him the speed to win races, but it also meant he couldn't sustain it across 17 rounds. Supercross championships are won by riders who can podium every weekend, not riders who win 3 races and DNF twice. Carmichael was the perfect example of that model. He didn't always have the fastest lap time, but he was on the podium every single round, and over the course of a season, that consistency compounds. Vuillemin couldn't, or wouldn't, race that way. He attacked every race like it was the only one that mattered, and when it worked, it was spectacular. When it didn't, it was catastrophic. He had injury-plagued seasons, he had bike problems, he had nights where he rode like he was trying to prove something instead of just executing a race plan. And in a championship format that punishes mistakes harder than it rewards brilliance, that approach was never going to win titles. His best championship finishes were 2nd in 2000 and 2002, 4th in 2004 and 2005, 7th in 2003, and 8th in 2001. But here's what the riders knew, and what the people who only look at championships miss: David Vuillemin was dangerous. Not in the sense that he was out of control, but in the sense that on any given night, he could beat anyone. Carmichael said it himself in interviews. Vuillemin was one of the few riders who made him adjust his lines, who forced him to ride his race instead of just managing the field. McGrath respected him, Reed respected him, Windham respected him, and in Supercross, where respect is earned by going bar to bar at 50 miles per hour through a rhythm section, that means something. Vuillemin didn't need a championship to prove he belonged. He proved it every time he pulled a hole shot and led a race with Carmichael in 2nd, or every time he came from mid-pack and carved his way to the podium. The riders knew, the teams knew, the fans who actually watched the races, not just the results, knew. The tragedy of David Vuillemin's career is not that he never won a title. It's that he raced in an era where winning a title required being better than Ricky Carmichael for 17 straight weekends. In 2004, Carmichael was out with a knee injury, and Chad Reed won the championship. That was the only year from 2001 to 2006 where Carmichael didn't win the Supercross title. Even Stewart, who is widely considered the only rider with the raw talent to match Carmichael, didn't win a Premier-class Supercross championship until 2007, after Carmichael retired. So when you ask why Vuillemin never became champion, the answer is simple: because he was racing against the GOAT, and he was doing it in the deepest field the sport has ever produced. In almost any other era, before or after, David Vuillemin would have been a champion. Put him in the mid-90s against McGrath without Carmichael coming up behind, and he's a title contender. Put him in the 2000s, and he's winning multiple championships. But he raced from 2000 to 2008, and that window was Carmichael's kingdom. The other piece of this is how Supercross itself changed during Vuillemin's career. The early 2000s marked the shift toward factory teams with full telemetry, suspension technicians, and data-driven race strategies. Riders like Carmichael and Reed thrived in that environment because they could process feedback, make micro-adjustments to setup between practice sessions, and execute a game plan with surgical precision. Vuillemin was an instinct rider. He felt his way through a track, adapted on the fly, and trusted his hands and body position more than he trusted a clicker setting or a map switch. That approach worked in outdoor motocross, where conditions change lap to lap and adaptation is everything. But in Supercross, where tracks are prepped to near-identical conditions and consistency is king, it left him at a disadvantage. He wasn't bad at setup, he just didn't race that way. And in an era where the difference between 1st and 5th was often 1/10 of a second per lap, that gap mattered. Vuillemin also dominated at the Bercy Supercross in Paris, winning 4 times in 1999, 2000, 2001, and 2003, more than any rider in the event's history. That's not a sideshow. Bercy was the most prestigious Supercross race outside the United States, and Vuillemin owned it. He beat American stars on their visits to France, and he did it in front of 14,000 screaming fans who knew they were watching something special. That's part of the full picture of who David Vuillemin was as a rider. Dominant in certain contexts, capable of beating anyone when the stars aligned, but never able to string it together across a full AMA championship season. So where does that leave David Vuillemin in the history of Supercross? If you judge him by titles, he doesn't exist. But if you judge him by the riders he beat, the races he won, and the era he competed in, he's objectively one of the greatest Supercross riders of all time. He's the greatest French rider in AMA Supercross history, no question. He's one of the greatest non-champions the sport has ever seen, alongside riders like Kevin Windham, guys who were fast enough to win titles, but raced in windows where the competition was simply too deep. And he's a case study in why championships don't tell the whole story. Greatness isn't just about winning. It's about who you beat, how you raced, and whether the people who actually lined up against you considered you a threat. By that measure, David Vuillemin was elite. Would he be a champion in today's Supercross? Maybe. But the question itself is almost irrelevant, because it assumes that the only way to measure a career is by counting trophies. David Vuillemin's legacy isn't that he never won a championship, it's that he raced in an era where winning one required being better than Ricky Carmichael for 17 straight weekends, and he still managed to be one of the most feared riders on the gate. That's not a failure. That's greatness without titles. Let us know what you think about that in the comment sections, or if you ever witnessed a David Vuillemin's win. And if you want to understand what pure, unmatched speed really looks like, watch next. The fastest man motocross ever saw, James Stewart. Explained, that story changes everything. And subscribe if you do not want to miss the next video.